Good afternoon. Hope you guys enjoyed your lunch, and thank you so much for being here to discuss this critical issue with us today. There were some great questions out there, and we hope that our presentation will be able to answer some of them. And again, if you have questions at the end, please feel free to ask us. My name is Herbani Ahuja, and I'm an associate counsel with the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice.
Hi, my name is Tara Moultrie. I'm a fellow at the Century Foundation.
So just a little bit about our organizations. The Institute seeks to empower people of color by building reparative systems that create wealth, transform justice, and harness democratic power from the ground up in New Jersey.
We're going to try this out. We're going to stand on opposite sides of the stage because the slides are going to have information that hopefully you can take notes on. I work at the Century Foundation, which is a think tank. It's a thing that people don't hear about often. But the goal is also to try to diversify the spaces that we're in. Essentially, we do research for a living. So if you enjoy English, if you enjoy history, reading, writing, there are career pathways that let you do that full-time for a pretty reasonable salary.
So our presentation today is going to be focusing on borrowers of color and the student debt crisis. So before we sort of jump into talking specifically more about higher education and student debt, we wanted to give you a little bit of background and context for the issue. So as you all know, higher education has become increasingly more expensive over the last few decades. And as a result, those who want to pursue higher education, go to college, go to university, they have to be able to afford these costs, or they have to take on student debt in order to afford these costs. So obviously wealth plays a large role in a student's ability to pay for higher education. And so we need to take a step back and really talk about the state of wealth in New Jersey. So as you can see here, New Jersey unfortunately has one of the worst racial wealth gaps in the country. So to put this into perspective, the racial wealth gap in New Jersey reaches approximately $300,000 compared to the national racial wealth gap of $160,000. I'm going to repeat that number in a different way to really let it sink in. So the median net wealth for white families in the state of New Jersey is $300,000 more than the median net wealth for black families. And furthermore, about 28% of black New Jersey households have no wealth or have more debts than they have assets. So here we can see a little bit more about the comparison between wealth inequality and income inequality. I want to make sure that we understand this distinction. So the numbers that we just discussed on the previous slide were about the wealth gap, which shouldn't be confused with the income gap. So income is really money that we receive regularly, right, through our jobs and such, whereas wealth encompasses the entirety of our assets. So our homes, our investments, our savings. And as you can see on the graphs on this slide, the difference between the median household income in New Jersey between black and white families is approximately $39,000, but the wealth disparity is massive at $300,000. So it's really important for us to understand that wealth really provides a safety net and opens doors and opportunities for us in the future. It acts as like a rainy day fund and a buffer against unexpected challenges that may come up in your life. So for instance, if you lose your job or you face a sudden health crisis, having wealth means that you have a financial cushion and that you can weather those storms without falling into financial distress. But on the other hand, not having access to wealth also prevents us from being able to access opportunities that we otherwise might have. So being able to make a down payment on a home or being able to afford a college education. So when we're thinking about wealth, unlike income, it's not just about meeting the needs of today, but also creating opportunities for our future. Next slide. So the racial wealth gap really manifests itself in different ways throughout the state, and this includes unequal access to housing and home ownership, work and benefits, unequal access to intergenerational wealth building assets, and student loans, which particularly weigh down on black borrowers. So now let's talk a little bit more, now that we have this context, let's talk a little bit more about how student loans contribute to wealth disparities. So nationally in 2022, student loans have reached an all-time high of $1.7 trillion. Okay, so I'll say that again, $1.7 trillion. That number is not just a statistic, it really represents the significant challenge that we as a society have to grapple with. So we really need to recognize that the student loan crisis is not felt equally. Our underfunding in higher education in recent decades has really created a disproportionate burden, particularly on Black borrowers. Black graduate students, for example, have borrowed more compared to their counterparts from other racial groups. And when we look at completion rates, Black students have the lowest six-year completion rates of any racial group. And unfortunately, this financial strain continues long after graduation. So Black borrowers typically find themselves owing more than the initial amount that they took out as a loan 12 years after entering college. So here we see an example of the effect of the racial wealth gap really reinforcing itself. Because Black people have historically had less access to wealth building opportunities than their white counterparts, they have to take on more debt to finance their education, but that debt in turn widens this racial wealth gap that we're talking about. So a little bit more about the racial wealth gap in higher education. In 2013, there was a study that found that white college-educated households were twice as likely to receive financial support from their families to pay for their education. They also received a greater sum on average, and that contributes to future wealth-building opportunities as well, because students who do not take on debt have more wealth-building opportunities in the future. Additionally, even after completing undergraduate and graduate degrees, Black graduates earn less than their white counterparts. The average white family has roughly 10 times the amount of wealth as the average Black family, while white college graduates have over 7 times more wealth than Black college graduates. So let's move to the next slide. So I'll pass it over to my colleague Tiara here.
Thanks. So super quickly, we are going to get to a lot of the questions that you guys had, especially around federal student loans, but we wanted to do some stage setting about how we got here. So a lot of the things that we talked about feel like they are someone else's problem, but really they're the result of systemic failure. So why do Black people have to borrow more? Because we don't have access to tangible assets. So if your parents are trying to finance your education, they can't take out additional equity on their home. They can't cash out a 401k. They can't take on extra hours at a job they don't have. And that's really part of the root of what's wrong with the education system. We do have a debt-financed education system. The vast majority of people can't afford their tuition on what they earn. A lot of times you'll hear politicians like Elizabeth Warren, maybe a name that you've heard, who talks constantly about the fact that they were able to afford to pay their tuition with a summer job. Because at state institutions, you could have tuition as low as $1,000 for a year, compared to what's now about $1,000 per credit at an institution. And for people wondering, it takes about 126 credits to graduate from a 4-year institution. So you're taking on a considerable burden by going on to higher education. There was some analysis done at the Institute when I was there that found that a 4-year degree from Rutgers by 2030 is going to cost over $125,000. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because Rutgers is often seen as a cheaper option. It's a public institution. It's local for many of us, but it's still expensive. And the reasons for that: we have growing demand and increased enrollment. So some people may have also heard there are other countries in the world where education is free. One of the reasons why the US doesn't do that, part of it is just a general political ideology that exists here of like, people should have to pay for their own things. People should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We don't believe that our tax dollars should fund X. But there's also a consideration about the fact that there's so much access to higher education here. Part of the way that places like the United Kingdom were able to keep tuition really low is literally by only covering people who they know could finish college. And I think that that's a reality that not enough people talk about. The vast majority of people don't finish college within 4 years, don't finish college within 6 years. And it's a real thing that happens to people because life happens. People have unplanned pregnancies, people have family situations, people have health issues that all lead to them not completing. And it's a real concern. We've seen decreased state investment in New Jersey. Again, the average tuition here at a 4-year state institution is $27,000 a year. That's only tuition. It's not covering things like room and board, which you'll also have to pay for, food, transportation, if you're going to a school that is not where you live. All of these things add up to costs. And so one of the ways that schools have found is they know that you don't have the money up front, but because there's no system to regulate what they charge you in tuition, they tell you to rely on federal student loans. Federal student loans are the best option for you because they have low interest rates, because they have paths to forgiveness, but it's still money that you're borrowing against yourself. Essentially, the federal government is telling you to borrow against your future earnings and bank on the fact that you'll complete. There's a lack of meaningful regulation. Again, colleges can charge whatever they want for tuition, which many people may find shocking. So here in New Jersey, at a public institution, a state regulator has to approve tuition increases, but they can approve them. So you could raise your tuition as much as 4% every year if you wanted to. In other places, they can raise tuition even higher than that, especially at private schools. Also, there's a lack of understanding. So one of the things that we're hoping to help with today is just to get a basis and a grounding in why college costs so much and how do you know how much it should cost. Again, if you see that a school costs $27,000, why isn't it clear that that doesn't include these things? I went to school a while ago. In addition to my actual tuition charges, I had a technology fee to use the lab. I had a paper fee because I was only allowed to print $25 a month in paper at the institution. I had to pay for food. I had to pay for transportation. I had to pay for my dorm. I had to pay for a number of fees, including a sports fee when I didn't even play sports. It was very odd. And so again, bringing it down to the New Jersey level, New Jersey often touts itself as one of the most educated places in the country. We have an overwhelming, not majority, but an overwhelming number of people who actually complete four-year degrees here. 41% of people in New Jersey have at least a bachelor's. Again, the average full-time cost for tuition at a New Jersey institution was $26,000. 63% of people in the class of 2020 had student loans. So again, the vast majority of people are not paying tuition out of pocket, are not having their full costs covered by only scholarships. Many people do have to borrow federal loans. Also, that average debt number, $35,000. And this is for, again, the class of 2020. We had a pause in tuition increases during the pandemic. States that are looking to recoup costs. So if you recruited a bunch of people who paid a flat rate for 3 years, what does that probably mean? You're going to increase tuition on future classes to make back all that money you lost out on during the pandemic. And so you can bet that by the time you get to college, those costs are going to be even higher. And finally, you also probably heard a lot about debt relief and debt cancellation. 1.12 million, or 11% of people in New Jersey, applied for debt cancellation when it was first announced by the Biden administration. The Supreme Court, of course, did not uphold that decision to allow the administration to process those claims, but it's a sign of the number of people here who really need access to relief through student loan debt cancellation. All right.
Okay, so far we've talked. Are you going to do it?
I was going to be like, just another quick thing. Just because this was one of the questions, was really focused on what can we do to cut down costs. New Jersey is doing a considerable amount to cut down costs by things like scholarship programs. But it's also important to remember, many scholarship programs do not cover the full cost of attendance. It's really important that as you get papers, as you get acceptance letters from institutions, you're really reading to make sure you know what is being covered by scholarships. Some schools will cover your full cost of tuition. Mine did. My room and board was $12,000 a year, so I still wound up having to borrowing that amount to live on campus.
So I know a lot of what we said was a little depressing. So we want to talk to you about what New Jersey has done to improve and address affordability for higher education in this state. So currently, New Jersey offers several programs that are geared towards college affordability. And if you guys are interested, I would highly encourage you to take notes on these and look them up when you go home, because there are some really great programs out there. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of outreach being done about them. So, for example, the New Jersey Tuition Assistance Grant, or TAG, is a need-based financial aid program. It goes to full-time undergraduate students that are enrolled in a degree or certificate program. It's pretty popular. About 1/3 of all full-time undergraduate students attending school in New Jersey receive some aid through TAG. The New Jersey College Promise is another program that offers an affordable pathway to a college degree. That program combines the Community College Opportunity Grant, or CCOG, and the Garden State Guarantee, or GSG. CCOG awards pay for the cost of tuition and approved educational fees at one of New Jersey's community colleges for New Jersey residents, and the Garden State Guarantee provides for the cost of tuition and fees for the third and fourth years of one of New Jersey's four-year public colleges or universities. So combined, both of these programs really provide an affordable option for a student to be able to graduate from a 4 years program. The New Jersey STARS program is another program that offers free tuition at a home county college for New Jersey residents who rank in the top 15% of their class at the end of junior or senior year of high school. And if you are a STARS recipient who earned an associate degree through the program, you might be able to be eligible for a STARS 2 reward, which allows you to transfer to a participating college or university to earn a bachelor's degree. And then we have some scholarship programs through the governor's office. So there's the Urban Scholarship Program, which was launched back in 2012. It's a merit-based scholarship program, which benefits students in New Jersey's economically challenged communities, and students have to rank at the top 5% of their class in order to be eligible. And there's additionally the governor's Industry Vocation Scholarship, which pays up to $2,000 per year, or up to the cost of tuition minus other aid that you might be receiving at New Jersey's technical and vocational schools, as well as some of their county colleges. So what more can New Jersey be doing to address affordability? So overall, the affordability crisis is really leading to lower enrollment rates across the country because potential students are now thinking about the cost of their college education versus the economic value that they're receiving from it. So what more can New Jersey and other states be doing to address college affordability? So as we discussed, New Jersey does have these programs on the previous slide, but we can do a lot more. So New Jersey really needs to expand on these programs so that they have the greatest reach, and also so they're prioritizing diversity. New Jersey should also be increasing state investments in higher education, which have dropped significantly since the 1990s and have forced institutions to pass on the cost of tuition onto students. And lastly, New Jersey should invest in programs that target the racial wealth gap, as we described before. And one example of such a program is baby bonds, which the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice has been advocating for. So what are baby bonds? Baby bonds, the idea of baby bonds was originally conceptualized by economist Eric Hamilton as a way to address wealth inequality. So baby bonds, in a baby bonds program, the government, soon after a child is born, will make an investment into an account or a trust on that child's behalf. And that trust will grow over time. When the child reaches the age of 18, they can take out that money and use it to help pay for their college education, or help pay for a down payment on a home, save for retirement, open up a small business, like one of those types of wealth generating purposes. And there is research that shows that baby bonds promote equity by providing low income and low wealth newborns with a financial endowment for their future, something that wealthy children already have. So there's also research that shows that baby bonds would actually help narrow the racial wealth gap over time. There's a federal bill right now pending that was introduced by Senator Cory Booker. It's called the American Opportunity Accounts Act. And more recently, several state and local jurisdictions have also been introducing their own baby bonds proposals. New Jersey was actually the first state to introduce baby bonds legislation after Governor Murphy announced his support back in 2020, but unfortunately that bill has not moved. Other states like Connecticut and other jurisdictions like Washington, D.C. have passed baby bonds proposals. So it can be done, and there is momentum growing across the country to do this. So we would love to really generate support for this program. So be sure to tell your representatives to support the baby bonds bill.
Super quick. Hopefully. What are your finance options? So hopefully this gets at the root of what many of you want to hear. How do you pay for loans? Or how do you pay for school? Really, the answer is loans. So there are two kinds of loans, federal and private loans. Federal loans have to be repaid in the same way that private loans do. Private loans require you to have a good credit history. So if you come from a community where you are a renter, where your parents have low-wage jobs, you may not be able to qualify for private loans. Many people who are starting college at 17 cannot sign onto loans of their own. They are officially contracts. You cannot enter into them without having a person over 18 sign on. Many people run into issues with this because your parents can't co-sign a loan. You wind up having to go to a different family member or a family friend. They have to sign on and agree that in the instance that you're in and able to pay, they will pay those loans for you. It could be very hard to find a co-signer, so just a thing to be mindful of, especially with private loans. Private loans also aren't eligible for any kind of debt relief. So you've been hearing a lot of conversation about debt cancellation. None of that conversation applies to private loans. I also had a private loan, which meant during the pandemic, when there was a 3-year payment pause, I was paying student loans that entire time because I had a private loan. You can use grants. Grants do not have to be repaid. This is also really important because they don't explain it when you get your letter, like your financial aid letter from your school. It doesn't clearly lay out these things. It's something that my job looks into, is just whether or not people can easily understand the forms. What does it mean to have a grant? What does it mean to have a loan? Again, grants don't have to be repaid. Fellowships don't have to be repaid. You can also use cash from savings or earned income. Many people work while they're on campus. You have access to things like the federal work study program. Many people also rely on their local community, so churches have been a great fundraiser in the Black community to help people pay for college and to cover unmet need. And then you can also do things like income share agreements, which we're seeing more of. Unfortunately, these are more of a predatory product. We talked about how a loan is basically you borrowing against your future earnings. Income share agreements do the same. You agree to give a portion of your income for a period of 5 to 10 years after you finish to the company that underwrites your ISA. Yeah. All right. Super quickly again, why do I talk so much about income share agreements and all of these various kinds of products? It's because everyone in the market has access to loans. To most institutions, you are a way of financing themselves. They rely on federal aid dollars to keep themselves afloat. You should be wary of predatory institutions. So a lot of for-profit colleges exist. We'll send you mailings, we'll send you letters. This is especially true of people who want to do credential programs. So automotive programs, people who want to be cosmetologists, which does require a license. And so it's still college. You still have to do post-secondary education and training. A lot of people wind up going to for-profit institutions. These for-profit companies are companies. First and foremost, their obligation is not first to their students, it's to their shareholders. So it's really important to think about these things when you're applying to different institutions. Who owns this institution? What is their obligation to me? Students at for-profit colleges are more likely to default. Students at for-profit colleges are also more likely to be Black women. They intentionally do this. So when I was applying to college, the thing was like, if you were home during the day during like Maury, or if you were watching like Paternity Court, you would see these ads during the day that said, I can't get a job because I didn't go to college. I didn't go to college, so I can't get a job. And they would go on. And the answer was to sign up for this for-profit company that was guaranteed to help you earn more money. They intentionally do that because they know that during that time of day, if you're home, it likely means you're unemployed. So it's a tactic that people use to reach people who they normally wouldn't be able to, and people who they know will be able to qualify for federal aid. Also, if you're an adult in the room, predatory institutions cost you money too. Every time they cancel debt for people who go to predatory institutions. So if a school closes because there is a pattern of abuse of their alumni, they all get access to debt relief. The Biden administration has already approved $37 million in debt discharges for just one school. All right, and on the accountability angle, New Jersey is trying to do more to require institutions to submit fiscal monitoring. There was a reference to Patterson earlier today. William Patterson ran into some financial trouble. New Jersey City University ran into some financial trouble. Montclair State now owns Bloomfield College as a result of financial troubles at all of those institutions. If you are a student, you may assume that if you're attending a school, it must not be in financial trouble. They are still taking applications. That is not the case. When schools close, it makes it really difficult for you to transfer, for you to be able to get your proof of completion, if you are applying for a job and they need proof that you have a certificate. If your school closes, all of those things become really hard to find. So the state of New Jersey is again trying to make that easier by requiring schools to post this kind of information and make it publicly available. They're also doing more to try to target predatory institutions. Again, the government just gives colleges access to Title IV, makes it very easy for them. New Jersey is trying to implement standards that say if you don't make more than someone with just a high school diploma, or you aren't able to reasonably afford your debt, you shouldn't have to take on that debt. So they're aiming to close a lot of institutions that prey on students. All right. The U.S. Education Department has something called the Gainful Employment Rule. Not a lot to think about, really targeted at for-profit institutions. But beginning in 2024, you will go to an institution, you will send an application. If a school is found to not offer you gainful employment, which means when you finish, you cannot get a job that allows you to pay off the debt that you've incurred, you'll have to sign a form that says, I, such and such, agree that I am going to a school that is unlikely to offer me financial benefit. The government has said if you sign that form, it will not eliminate your ability to sue that institution, but remains to be seen. All right. And repayment, hopefully something that is important for also teachers in the room, because I know this is coming up a lot, especially people who can't call during the day because they are teaching you, so they can't call their loan servicer between like 8 and 5. The Biden administration has already approved $127 billion in debt relief. Here are the ways that you can repay your loans. You can do income-driven repayment. That means that you take a portion of your income, and that is what drives what you have to repay. Your student loan repayments are due every single month. A standard plan is 12 years. What do you think the longest amount of time on a loan is? How long does the federal government say you can pay your loans back? Any guess? 30? It's not 10. It's also not 30, 25 years. 25 years is what you have to pay every single month, 25 years of payments before you get access to debt forgiveness. When we think about debt forgiveness, it feels like something that comes immediately. That is not the case. Public service loan forgiveness does offer people relief after 10 years, but it's 10 years of on-time payments. 120 consecutive payments is required before they will cancel your remaining debt. It's also really important to note that if you previously defaulted, what is default? If you can't pay your loans, you go a period of 90 days without any payments, you're not even eligible for these programs anymore. You can do Fresh Start, which is an option for people who were previously in default. You can apply for bankruptcy, which nobody wants to do, but is now a pathway for debt relief. You can also get cancellation. You can get cancellation on your student loans through borrower defense. Again, we talked about predatory institution. There are cases where a school will sign a loan in a student's name and the student has no knowledge. If that happens to you, you do have a recourse. You can file a borrower defense application and say, I didn't agree to this debt. I didn't agree to repay this debt. I shouldn't have to repay this debt. You can have total and permanent disability. Again, this is really unfortunate because many people have had to rely on this for debt relief. Basically, the federal government says if you are totally and permanently disabled, and only totally and permanently disabled, you can get debt relief. This means that there are people who go in through chemo treatments, who are doing all of these things and still have to pay their student loans. The federal government, in the case of a shutdown, has to produce a list of like, what are we still gonna do even if the government shut down? Number one on that list is collect loans. They will not process civil rights complaints, but they will still take your loans even if the government is shut down. You can also get closed school discharge, and you can qualify for teacher loan forgiveness. Something also important to me because my partner is a teacher. So if you are a teacher and you have questions about these programs, let me know. All right, and last but not least is some ongoing advocacy efforts. So even though the Supreme Court eliminated the Biden administration's hoped wide-scale debt relief, there is still an option for debt relief for most people called negotiated rulemaking. Essentially, every time the federal government wants to change a rule, they have to have a list of, or a group of constituents come together, they discuss the rule, they talk about the rule, and then they release a rule, the federal government approves it or doesn't approve it, but it is another way that we may get access to debt relief. We have a bunch of people who are now aiming to prove college value. So if you hear people talk about return on investment, what do I get in exchange for my tuition dollars? The federal government is now acknowledging that the tuition crisis has gotten so crazy, they have to step in and start to regulate how schools are proving their value. And of course, baby bond accounts are another way that we're opening up pathways, especially for Black borrowers and Black families to have access. People who live in Newark, this is especially important. We come from a low-income community. That's not because the people who live here don't have drive, don't have ambition, don't have college degrees. Many of us do. It's really as a result of this ongoing issue about the debt that people have, our inability to get access to credit, lines of credit, that make it really difficult for people to repay their loans. So if you can avoid student loans, if you have to borrow, there is a way to borrow responsibly, and really it starts with the federal loan system. And we got time for questions, if we can get a mic in the audience. It's over. Okay. So if you're a high school student, we may ask for like an exit ticket. Apparently that's a thing you have to do, is like tell us what you learned during the day.
Down here too.
Your postcard is your exit ticket.
I have a question. Interest is a large part of the student loan problem, right? And so why is the government, has anyone ever lobbied for the government not to charge interest? If a student borrows $80,000, how come a student, because they're borrowing because they can't afford, right? And so they borrow this money that they really can't afford to borrow, hoping for something that may or may not happen. Because I have had students that have gone to college and are trying to make money on YouTube now, right? And so has anyone ever said, why not just charge people or have people repay what they borrow as opposed to interest, and then the fees that come when they can't afford to pay? One last thing. The interest for my student loans started in September, but my payment is not until October. And so the interest is already accumulating before I'm even obligated to pay. So I think that that's a part of the problem. We don't have to forgive everybody. We've accepted the debt, it's our debt, and you know, we should be responsible for paying it. But how about you not charge us, Americans, interest on that loan?
So people have tried to address this and have said that loans shouldn't come with interest. Unfortunately, I'm going to give like an economic answer that no one's going to like, which is the federal government charges you interest to protect itself. So basically it says if there is another period of economic crisis, if there's an issue due to inflation, we have to know that there's some guarantee that we're going to get money back. And for the people who we don't get money back from, we need to charge interest on all of the loans. There are states that charge zero interest on loans. So Massachusetts, for example, does zero interest loans if you go to school in the state, but it's not something that's generally there. The other issue that you encounter is, even though we call them federal loans, your federal loans are still managed by a regular group, a regular finance company. That company makes more money on other loan products. And this is a really unfortunate like economic thing about student loans. If you don't pay your student loans, they can't take your degree back. You already have it. If you don't pay your mortgage, the bank can take your house back. So the interest and all of these things are basically a way for that system of finance and mortgage and loan brokers to be able to say, we still get something out of this experience since we can't take back the asset that you got through going to school. Very unfortunate, but also we're doing lobbying at the federal level to try to reduce those fees. Unfortunately, most people still don't want zero, but they are open to reductions.
Yeah, so there's more questions. Can I read a couple from the index cards? Great. And I know there was a group of students who had questions over here, but we didn't have, I think we may have ran out of cards, but if you have them, maybe write them down and we'll find them. So I'll read a couple of these. The first one is from Charisma. How do you manage how do you manage going to college, especially when it's out of state, in a way that's affordable? There was a similar question from Annie. The one quick response I'll say is a lot of your schools have dual enrollment. So while you're in high school, you can also be taking classes at local colleges and getting that education for free. You're not having to pay for those credits. So there's a way that you could begin to start getting ahead of that right now. But maybe if you guys have ideas around kind of paying for out-of-state tuition or knowledge of that, that would be great. Scholarships is also super important. There's a lot of juniors and seniors I met here. There's no age where it's too early to start asking about how can I get ready for scholarships. Another question was, how do I make connections and network within college? This is from Andrew. How do I make connections and network you can start by networking here too, right? But also just being in the room and getting to know people and asking questions is really important. And then the last questions, these are kind of related, from Kayla or Kyla, applying for scholarships. How do you know if you qualify? And what opportunities are available, social opportunities are available for students in college. So around affordability, in-state, out-of-state, saving money, getting ready for college, et cetera. And we could have some follow-up conversations. I'm already talking with some of the members of NJBIC, so in preparation for some stuff following this, how we can get y'all's ideas and questions as young people as far as college affordability. We can figure out ways to get some of these answered if we don't get them all answered today. So
are we addressing all of the questions?
Whatever you feel like you can respond to. I just wanted you to get all of them before we move on.
And I know we're running behind, so I'll do my best to answer these as quickly as possible, and Bonnie will do the same. Although we will admit that we are both from New York, a state that invests more in higher education, and so people generally borrow less. But it's not a challenge to the state of New Jersey, but it's a fact. So going to school out of state only makes a difference if you're thinking about attending a public institution. Private schools are not regulated. There's no law that requires them to charge a certain percentage of tuition. So if you live in New Jersey and you're trying to decide between going to Felician or going to Bryn Mawr, you just have to decide which of those is better for you. There's no benefit to being an in-state student versus an out-of-state student, because only public institutions, again, charge those different rates. Tuition in New Jersey is especially high. It's the third highest tuition of any state program, so even in-state, you're facing a considerable burden. But luckily, through the programs that we talked about earlier, things like the Garden State Guarantee Program, the Governor's Urban Scholarship Program, those are all pathways for you to eventually be able to pay off some of that. And I also want to be transparent about the fact that it's still very expensive. College costs are just increasing exponentially. There's been like a 400% increase in tuition in the last 20 to 30 years. So I did most of these things. I did dual enrollment. I graduated early. I had a scholarship from my institution and an external scholarship. I still borrowed $30,000 in student loans. That's the reality. School is very expensive. I chose to go to a private institution. So again, there's not that same level of regulation about what they charge. It was something that I thought was important. I felt like I could pay it back on a 12-year standard plan. So that is your standard rate when you complete your loan application. The number of monthly payments that it gives you is on a 12-year plan. And for me, it made sense. I was really clear about what my goals were. I was really also clear about the fact that I knew I had to get a master's degree. And so that was just a thing that I had to recognize in making that decision.
Yeah, and like Tiara said, it basically, New Jersey has very expensive higher education costs, so it might actually be cheaper to go outside to a private college if they're giving you more money, right? So it's not necessary that in-state tuition is going to be cheaper for you at a public institution within New Jersey. So always consider, external scholarship opportunities, but also whatever financial aid that school would be offering you as well.
Thank you. Actually, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We'll have an opportunity to speak on the side. Please give it up.